So one of the tasks for the project was deciding which accounting issues are specific to NPOs, different from the for-profit or the public sector entities, and therefore needing different guidance. So a long list of 20 issues was drawn up based on research, but it wasn't feasible to address all of them in the time and budget available. So we developed some criteria to prioritize the topics and assess the long list against those criteria to come up with a short list of 10 topics, which are covered in part 2 of the consultation paper. So in the consultation paper, we asked these 3 questions. Is the long list complete, or are there other issues that we should also be considering? Are they the right criteria? And do you agree with the shortlist? Now, 67% of respondents thought the long list was complete. Some thought that additional topics should be added, and others that some should be removed. In terms of topics that should be added to the long list, 3 of those mentioned were actually already on the list. That is foreign exchange transactions, related parties, and heritage assets, as well as reserves and restricted funds, which are set to be included within the topic we have called presentation of financial statements. Other subjects of concepts and pervasive principles was also mentioned by respondents, and those issues will be considered while we make modifications to the concepts and pervasive principles section of the IFRS for SME. New topics that were suggested for the long list included pension costs, social impact accounting, service contracts, cash flow statement, and joint activities. And we will be giving consideration about whether or not to add these to the long list. Some respondents suggested removing topics from the long list, questioning whether they were really NPO specific issues. And that included investments, service concessions, and foreign currency transactions. Now, these topics will remain on the long list, but further work will be done to articulate why they belong there. Now, in terms of the criteria for prioritization, there was general support with 80% agreeing. The comments of the other 20% have been really helpful in adding nuance, but none suggested fundamental changes to the criteria. And then in terms of the shortlist itself, 58% agreed. A number of respondents suggested adding foreign currency transactions, and this was also mentioned frequently during our outreach events. There was some discussion in the advisory groups as to whether foreign currency presented any accounting issues that were unique for the sector. Taking account of this feedback, the project has decided to add foreign currency transactions to the shortlist, noting that they can create sector-specific accounting issues, especially in relation to fund accounting and expenditure classification. Apart from foreign exchange, respondents also recommended other topics to be added to the shortlist, namely legacy income, investments, consolidation, leases, and grant liabilities. Now, whilst noting the responses made, based on the arguments presented, we were not persuaded that any of those topics should be promoted to the shortlist at this time. So moving on now to part 2 of the consultation. Within the responses we had, you can see that not everyone commented on all the topics. The slide here shows that there were the largest number of responses for financial statements presentation, narrative reporting, and grant expenses, with NPOs acting on behalf of other entities and measuring non-financial assets held for social benefit, acting attracting the fewest comments. So for these reasons, in creating capacity to include foreign currency exchange, we may defer a topic with fewer responses to a later stage. And we have in mind non-financial assets held for social benefit. We now have a series of slides that provide a quick guide as to the types of responses to the topics in part 2. I should mention that we're not outlining each of the alternatives, and we won't go into very much depth. It's really to give you a sense of the nature and array of responses that we got. We will be carrying out in-depth analysis of the feedback as we look at each individual topic. And so the analysis at the moment is necessarily high level. So for each of these slides, we'll show the feedback on how well we've captured the issue as set out in each topic paper and the response to the alternatives that were put forward. So for topic 1, which was reporting entity and control, 70% agreed with the description of the topic. And that was actually the lowest of all the topics. Now, of the alternatives, the majority preferred a pragmatic approach to determining control, which is currently adopted in IFRS for SME. Moving on to topic 2, which was NPOs acting on behalf of other entities. 87% agreed with the description of the issue, but there were mixed views about whether to take an approach based on IFRS or IFRS for SMEs. The difference being that the approach to determining control over revenue and expenses, and there was no support for the use of an IPSAS basis. For topic 3, which is non-exchange revenue, 90% of respondents agreed with the description of the issue. In terms of the alternative, there was greatest support for the alternative that used IPSAS as the basis, with some exceptions. There was also some support for IFRS-based solutions, but preference for IFRS for SMEs over IFRS. For topic 4, which is grant expenses, 88% of respondents agreed with the description of the issue. There was strong support for option 2, with the principles being developed by IPSAS on transfer expenses being included in the proposals. For topic 5, the measurement of non-financial assets for social benefit, 81% of respondents agreed with the description of the issue. There were mixed views on the alternatives proposed. Alternative 1, which is based on the choice of cost or revaluation models permitted in all international standards, had marginally the highest support. But there was also support for alternatives that allowed an additional measurement base for revaluation, and also for an alternative that only permits the cost model. For topic 6, that's inventory held for use or distribution, 89% agreed with the description of the issue. There was greatest support for alternative 1, with inventory measured at the lower of cost or net realizable value as per IFRS and IFRS for SMEs. There was less support for alternatives that offered an alternative to net realizable value. For topic 7, presentation of financial statements, 93% agreed with the description of the issue. Respondents were really split, as you can see, between alternative 2, which is based on IFRS for SMEs, but introduces fund accounting, and alternative 3, which builds on alternative 2 through the inclusion of a supplementary statement on projects and programs. But there was also some support for an alternative which mirrors the requirements of current international standards. For topic 8, classification of expenses, 96% agreed with the description of the issue. There was strongest support for alternative 3, requiring the presentation of expenses by both nature and function. This was followed by alternative 1, which allows a choice between the two in line with current international standards. For topic 9, fundraising costs, 84% agreed with the description of the issue, and there was strongest support for alternative 3, which would involve the creation of new NPO-specific guidance on this topic. For topic 10, narrative reporting, 96% agreed with the description of the issue. There was strongest support for alternatives 2 and 3. Alternative 2 was to apply the current international guidance from the suites of international accounting standards and tailor it to NPOs. And then alternative 3 was to apply the integrated reporting concepts for the framework created by the International Integrated Reporting Council. Overall, there was strong support for the description of the issues set out in the consultation paper, but the feedback on the alternatives was considerably more mixed. To get behind this feedback, we will be holding focus groups to ask specific questions relating to the feedback we've received. We've already held the first one of these on the reporting entity, and we'll be prioritizing those who provided feedback for inclusion in those focus groups. So that finishes the feedback on the consultation paper itself. But before we close this webinar, I'm excited to explain something about the next steps and make a big announcement. So as you know, the IFR4NPO project exists to develop guidance. And in recent months, we've been able to confirm the actual name of what the guidance will be. It will be called INPAG. That stands for International Nonprofit Accounting Guidance. We will be launching it officially in a video next month, but you heard it first here. Now, it was mentioned earlier that respondents requested greater clarification about who the guidance was for. Now, it will be up to each jurisdiction to decide exactly which NPOs should apply INPAG, but we've developed the attached visual to explain who we think might benefit most. It shows that at one end, tier 3, we have micro NPOs. Now, the users of their financial reports are likely to have simpler needs, and cash basis reporting could be sufficient. At the other end, we have tier 1 NPOs with more complex needs. This might be because they hold the funds of service users or have debt that is traded on a public exchange. Now, other international or national accrual-based standards could be needed to meet all of their reporting needs. We would still expect the guidance to be useful to this group though. Now, tier 2 NPOs need to track assets and liabilities and report on a range of transactions and activities to meet the needs of the users of their financial reports. And INPAG is designed for these NPOs with the needs of their users in mind. Now, I hope that can help the community to understand our intentions, and we welcome your feedback. Looking ahead now, the next phase of the project is developing the draft guidance. We'll be doing this with the technical and practitioner advisory groups in 3 tranches of work, each culminating in the issue of an exposure draft. The timeline, as you can see, shows that we hope to issue the first of these in late 2022, but please note that there are some external dependencies and the plan is subject to change. Each tranche will cover different aspects. Broadly speaking, the framing issues will be first, accounting treatments second, and presentation aspects in the final tranche. With each tranche, we will make it clear how the sections being presented will fit into the structure of the final guidance as a whole. The plan is for there to be a 4-month consultation period after each exposure draft. During this time, we'll hold webinars and receive written responses from stakeholders. And we'll also be holding focus groups throughout this period as needed. So we really hope that you'll stay connected. There are many ways you can do that. The most important is to subscribe to project updates from the website. The website contains a wealth of resources and videos, so please do take a look. You can also join the conversation on our LinkedIn page and follow us on Twitter. So I think with that, it remains for me to say a huge thank you. Thank you for joining us and thank you for watching this webinar.